We've collected a bunch of miniatures over the years, and we don't have a character associated with most of them. Each episode, I'll do a writing exercise where I pick one, select a game system to stat them out, add some story flavor, and write it in the big book. You're watching a mini-review. And another mini-review, this time with a slightly different table. I decided to go with one that I didn't paint before. This one was one that we got at Carnage Con in 2021, I think, and I was just drawn to it. It reminds me of the Rochoids from the Irwinian Systems Mutant World. I love the design on it, it's unique, it's interesting. I really like to see minis that look different. Like, different from what you usually expect to see in miniatures and in characters as well. I love strange creatures, I love the new weird, I love weird fantasy and science fiction, and this guy just really drew me in. The coloring is quite good, clear, distinct. He's got a really neat looking iron hammer and what looks like a carapace shield, but I can't really talk that much about the style of his construction because, of course, I neither sculpted him nor did I paint him. So, yeah, I think we're good to select a system. Let's see if we can stat this guy out, find out who he is. Alright, with the poor gent in the background being threatened by two other miniatures, let's select our system and see how we're going to be statting him out, shall we? Here's a good one. Haha, nice. Barbarians of Lemuria. He is a perfect fit. Wonderful. This will be awesome. So this one was an interesting one. The thing is, I don't usually like to go with the whole barbaric non-human kind of thing, because I think it's kind of demeaning to non-human characters, and it assumes inherently that human beings are better, which in a lot of settings they aren't or shouldn't be. And I think it's more interesting to, if you've got fantasy races, make something different and make it more than just a bunch of mud-dwelling, vaguely tribally coded monsters. But I found that in Barbarians of Lemuria, every character is coded that way. For the most part, they're either from these decadent cities filled with mist-shrouded temples, or they come from tribal lands. They live in tribes in the desert, or they come from these tribes in the north, or they come from these tribes in the temperate zones. And so I decided I was just going to kind of embrace that, but give a few little twists of humanity for this character. So, what I decided to do was, first off, I named him Hs-An-Nah-Kol. And I thought it was just kind of a neat one to sort of imagine what names would be like for his species. But also, that name is inspired from the Pride of Shanur novels. Usually the names of the Stisho aliens have names like that. So I thought that'd be pretty cool to do. For origins, I went with Beshar Desert. But I figured he'd come from that sort of zone. I know, like, he's supposed to be like a crustacean creature, which would imply more water. But honestly, I prefer if he seems to come from a drier area and be more akin to a scorpion than a crab. For his careers, these are also the character's life up until the point where you start playing them, very similar to Burning Wheel. So for this, I went with first he was a slave, and then a mercenary, then a gladiator, then a blacksmith. And I thought that was an interesting way to go about it. I like the idea of implying that most of his life was spent presumably as a slave or a thrall within his own culture, that most members of it just serve as servants, slaves, thralls, until they are given a proper opportunity to actually develop higher skills. So at any one time, most of the population of these creatures probably toils for the few who exist in power. But of course, as you can see, Hs-An-Nah-Kol eventually broke free of his servitude, though that's where I put most of his career points. I figured he would have the most familiarity with how to labor as a slave, but also how to learn secrets, how to listen, how to be very careful and cautious, skills which might serve him very well. I decided he took a spin as a mercenary, but gained very little experience from it. Then a gladiator, where, his showiness as a non-human probably made a bit more sense. It's mostly humans. In fact, I think it's all humans in Barbarians of Lemuria, but I made an exception for this character, obviously. And then I decided that he became a blacksmith after he saved up enough money. And I figured that's where we find him at the start of his adventures, is that he's working as a blacksmith. I almost forgot to do his attributes and skills as I was writing out the character sheet. I left no space for them, so I kind of crammed them in a little bit. The attributes on the description and the skills wherever I could find them next to languages, it looks like. I decided he would be strong and very, very high in willpower, but low on agility and low on appearance, because judging by human standards, his appearance is rather off-putting. And I figured his shell would weigh him down, agility-wise, so I made him mostly strong and strong-willed. For skills, I went with high melee and a bit of defense. I figured he'd be really, really good at just wielding his weapon and smashing through all opposition. That was probably how he was trained as a gladiator, because, you know, he was more for show than for actual skill. It was more to show off that they had one of these strange desert scorpion people as one of their gladiators, rather than if he could actually fight, and he was lucky to survive it all. He calculated out having 12 lifeblood, which is pretty good. 3 hero points, because, as I'll explain later, I gave him extra traits. No arcane power, because he starts out with no magical abilities, and no advancement points, because he's just starting out. For traits, I gave him both Sand Tracker and Keen Eyesight. Keen Eyesight, now that I look at it in retrospect, is a little bit odd, seeing as how he looks like he's got these small, nearsighted, beady eyes. But I like to imagine that he's picked up either Keen Eyesight not from his heritage, but from his skills and his experiences. For flaws, I went with Feels the Cold. I figured that this character would probably have a harder time in cold temperatures, because his body is just simply not built for the cold temperatures. He's more built for giving off heat and surviving in the desert. For weapons, I just simply gave him a heavy shellfolk mace, using the basic stats of the mace in the game. I gave him carapace armor rated for chainmail, and a shield, obviously, because he's got a shield. I figured that should be included. Most of the armor that characters wear in Barbarians of Lemuria is not armor. Mostly they're just running around in battle harnesses and chainmail bikinis and things, but I figured this character would make sense for him to wear a lot of armor, or at least have that reflected statistically. I went with something a bit subtler, lower in detail for the drawing. I wanted to sort of convey the idea of the fact that this character's had a very traumatic life, probably more so than he's ever willing to admit or able to articulate to his human compatriots. I see him as being haunted, but not in a way which cripples him, but rather causes him to knuckle down under pressure, get this panicked look in his eyes, and just sort of press on, regardless of how he feels. So I decided to do sort of him surviving a battle scene, and just sort of leave open the narrative behind the picture. I decided to have a blood-stained hammer for him, implying that he's just viciously brutalized some people, probably in self-defense, or who knows, maybe he was recruited into a combat. Either way, he looks very, very traumatized. He's got some arrows sticking in him and things like that. He's got a big gash along his carapace shield. So he looks like he has definitely survived a harrowing battle. One which I think reflects the general way his character has moved and existed. All in all, I was quite pleased with how this character came out. It was a bit of a challenge to do something really truly unique with him, but that aside, I didn't mind too terribly. I love Barbarians of Lemuria. It's a very, very streamlined, very, very simple system. Simple rules to just bring across what you need for the character and nothing more. No extensive skill list. You've just got your basic combat skills. You've got your basic 4 attributes. And for careers, I just really, really love systems these days that have no skill lists, but don't abandon skills entirely at all. I love ones that have careers, because then they're very, very open. Shadow of the Demon Lord does this too, where instead of having skill lists, you just are given a career and you can ask the GM, hey, I have a bit of experience as an artisan. Could I get a bonus to this role? Or, oh, I have a background as a blacksmith. I think I could possibly attempt to do this particular smithing. I think I could help out with this. I like to let roles lie naturally, But I don't mind the hero point system, especially because I love the way crits work in this. When you're fighting a mob of smaller, weaker enemies, the goons that usually pile onto Conan, for example, if you roll a critical success, you just roll your weapon die, and that's how many guys you just defeat. So I love that. I love that immensely. But yeah, so I found this character to be a real delight. Plus, I'm finally glad that I got to know this one. I've had this guy sitting around for a while, and I've found myself wondering, who are they? And what exactly do they have to tell us?
I do not hear them, but I see shadows on the floor. Someone, many someone, enter my forge. I put down iron stake I'm making. I put hand on hammer haft. Who enter? They no answer, but I hear whisper of weapon leaving sheath. They come to fight, maybe kill. They be stupid, foolish to think no one tried that before. Hs-An-Nah-Kol, stronger than cold desert night, smarter than blood wasp. I survive this long, can survive longer too.